Now let's dive into the second section of this training where we're mostly going to look at how you can calculate your cost. And we're going to proceed in 3 steps to do that. First, we will clarify which of your handmade business costs are variable costs and which are fixed costs. Then we will calculate your fixed cost so you have a clear idea of what your monthly overhead or operating expenses are. And finally, we will calculate your variable cost, including raw materials, labor costs directly linked to your product creation, and any other variable expenses your business is likely to have to cover. And finally, we'll wrap up the training with some key takeaways. So how can you calculate your cost? If you're not sure what your costs are and if they are fixed or if they are variable costs, the best way to start is to take a look at your bank statements or your invoices and receipts and to list all your expenses over the last few months or over the last year. If you're just starting your handmade business and haven't got any business statement or receipt yet, simply list down all the expenses you think you will have to pay to run your business and to create your products. Then simply ask yourself, would this expense increase every time I would sell one more product? If the answer to that question is yes, then it is most likely a variable cost. If not, it is most likely a fixed cost. You can use a table like the one in your workbook to record your expenses and categorize them accordingly. It will look something like this. For example, here we have 3 different lines for 3 different types of expenses. The first one is for a web hosting fee that is $29 and that we pay every month. And then we have a purchase for $190 of beads that is not a recurring expense that we've only paid once. And then we have an expense of $300 per year for a design software. So when you have something that is paid per year, you want to divide that up by 12 months to have an average of what it costs you every month. So in this case, 300 divided by 12 is 25, which is why you can see 25 in the monthly amount for that specific expense. And so once you have listed all your expenses that you see in your bank statement or in your receipt and looking over your invoices over the last few months or over the last year, you need to then determine whether that's fixed or variable based on whether it's going to increase when you make more sales. So for example, web hosting, if you ask yourself, well, if next month I don't make sales, will I still need to pay this $29? And the answer is yes. So that's why we ticked fixed cost and we put a little cross in that column. For the second example here, the beads, this is not something that we need to pay next month unless we want to because we have more sales and more products to create. So it is a variable expense because it only increases if we make more sales. And then finally, the design software, similar to the web hosting expense, is something that we do have to pay every year or every month, even when we don't necessarily make sales. And for that reason, it's a fixed expense, a fixed cost. So now that you know which costs are variable and which ones are fixed, it will be much easier to calculate your overhead or your monthly fixed expenses. So from the exercise you just did, use the table in your workbook to write down your fixed cost and their corresponding monthly amount, and then sum them up to get your total monthly overhead. So going back to this example here, we only want to be looking at the expenses that are fixed, your fixed costs. So in this case, it was the web hosting and the design software. So we want to add them up to this new table that only includes the fixed costs that we have every month or every year. And we want to sum it up to know on average what our fixed monthly expenses are. In this case, 29 and 25 would be $54. Now let's take a look at your variable costs. Variable costs vary depending on how many products you sell, but they will also be different for every single product that you sell because you're going to be using different materials, different packaging for every product in your store. So in the following activities, we're going to be calculating your variable cost and we're going to break the process down into 3 different calculations. First, we'll look at your cost of goods sold and we'll break that down into 2 parts. First, calculating the total variable cost per item excluding labor. So we'll look at the raw materials and supply that you need to create your product, the packaging cost for that product, and the shipping fees that you might need to pay when purchasing the materials or the packaging for that product. And then we'll look at the cost of goods sold, but only the cost of labor. And by adding those together, A and B, as you can see on the slide here, will get your cost of goods sold for every single product in your store. And then finally, we'll look at your other variable business expenses. So these are the three elements that we'll look at together. Let's start with the first element, which is your cost of goods sold per item, excluding labor cost. Now, you're going to need to do this for every single product that you sell. We're going to use this table here as an example, and let's imagine that we are selling a pair of knitted gloves that have some embroidered beads on them as well, just for this example. In the first column, material and supplies, we're going to use it to record the name of the supply, material, or item you purchased in order to create your products. For example, it could be something like 5 kilos of clay or 500 units of turquoise stones. And in this specific example, we can see that we purchased 500 grams of blue yarn, 240 grams of red yarn, 1,000 beads, 500 labels, and 100 packaging boxes. Essentially, you want to write what you bought and how much of it, whether it be in units or in weight. If you want, you can also write down the reference from your purchase receipt or invoice. This is not necessary, but it can help you know exactly what purchase you're referencing. And this is what I've used as an example here for the beads. In the second column, we want to look at the material or supplies purchase price. So we use this column to record how much this purchase cost you. In the example below, 500 grams of blue yarn were purchased for $2.50. 240 grams of red yarn were purchased for $2.50 as well. The 1,000 beads that we got were $50. We've got 500 labels for $65, and we got 1,000 packaging boxes for $44.95. What's important here is to remember to include the shipping fees that you might have paid to receive these supplies. So for example, if the 100 packaging boxes were really $35, but you paid $9.95 in shipping fees, you would record the full amount that you paid, which here is $44.95. We're going to use the next column, portion used to make a product, to record how much of this supply you need to use to create one unit of your product. So in our example, to create one pair of gloves. In this example, 500 grams of blue yarn were purchased for $2.50. But for this particular product, to make those gloves, we're not going to need to use 500 grams. We're only going to require 250 grams. And because 250 grams is half of 500 grams, we write half, or 1 out of 2, in this column as the portion used. Similarly, for the red yarn, we only need 30 grams of it to create that pair of gloves, so we write down 1/8 as the portion. For the beads, we bought a pack of 1,000, but we only need to use 5 of them in the final product, so the portion is 5 out of 1,000. For the labels, we only use 1 out of the pack of 5,000 that we bought, and for the packaging, same thing, we only need 1 box out of the 1,000 that we bought. Finally, in the last column, we're going to look at the cost per item. So you want to use this column to calculate how much of each supply this product is costing you. For example, for the blue yarn, we paid $250 for the full amount for 500 grams, but we only use half of that in the end product, so the calculation comes up to $1.25. For the red yarn, same thing. We only use 30 grams out of the 240, so it's only costing us $0.31. For the beads, it's only costing us $0.25. And you want to do the same thing for the labels, that ends up being $0.13, and for the packaging boxes, which is $0.45. Finally, your total variable cost per item, so your cost of goods sold excluding labor, because we're only looking at supplies and materials here, for this specific item, for this pair of glove, is the sum of the amounts in the cost per item column, which which here adds up to $2.48. What this means is that every time you create and sell a pair of gloves, it costs you $2.48 in material and supplies. So we've looked at the material and supplies part of the cost of goods sold, but as you know, creating and selling each product also incurs a variable labor cost, which we also need to calculate, and that's what we will do now. A very quick way to estimate how long it takes you on average to create a specific product is to run a simple test by creating the same product 5 times and recording how long it took you on average. This method has its limits though, because it doesn't calculate how much time you spend on each step of the product creation. And this is quite important because each step of the creation process might not be of the same value. For example, you could hire someone to help you with packaging your product or to help you pre-cut pieces of fabric before you actually do the sewing. And each of these tasks require different levels of skills and could be remunerated differently. So to calculate your variable labor costs for each product, we're going to record each necessary task or step to complete the product from scratch all the way to it being packaged and ready to ship, and the associated cost in a table like the one you can see on your screen right now. That's also, of course, in your workbook. In the first column, the creation process list of tasks, you want to record the different tasks that need to be done to finish the product entirely. For example, for a ceramic mug, it could look like step 1, prepare clay, step 2, use a potter's wheel, step 3, bake in a kiln, step 4, check for imperfection, etc., all the way to packaging the item ready for shipping. Then in the second column, task length in minutes, we want to record how long each step or task takes in minutes. And the third column, task length in hours, is simply a conversion of that task length in minutes into hours. So you want to look at the task length in minutes and divide it by 60 to know how long it takes you for each task expressed in hours. Column number 4, your task hourly rate, is here for you to record how much it would cost you to hire someone per hour for this very specific task based on the level of skills needed for that task. So as you can see in the example, these are obviously random numbers that I've just used because they're easy to remember, but we can see that task 1 has an hourly rate of $15 when task 2 has an hourly rate of $35. This might mean that the first task could be done by someone that's got less experience, but the step number 2 in the creation process of this product is maybe the most important part of it and can only be done by someone that's got a substantial amount of experience in this craft, and therefore that's something that costs a little bit more in hourly wage. Finally, the last column is your task total, and this is your task hourly rate multiplied by the task length in hours. So this really tells you how much each step of the creation process is costing you per product. And finally, at the bottom, we've got the total variable labor cost for this specific item, because again, this is something that you have to calculate for each of your products. And in our example, we get to $14.92. Now, once you calculated for each item the variable labor cost for this item and the variable cost for this item excluding labor, so what we've just did, the 2 examples that we just looked at, you can add them up to see what your cost of goods sold for this specific item is. But of course, you are going to sell different quantities of different types of products every month in your shop. And so you can use a table like the one in your workbook to calculate your total cost of goods sold over a month based on what items you sold and how many units you sold. So what we're doing here, just a little sum up, is that we've looked at the material and supplies part of the cost of goods sold. We've looked at the variable labor cost of the cost of goods sold. And now we're going to add them up for each item to figure out what the total variable cost for each item is. So in the first line of this table here, you can see we have 2.48 plus 14.92, which gives us a total variable cost of 17.4 for the example that we've been using. And so if during a certain period of time, so let's say during a month, you sell this product 12 times, then the total cost of goods sold for this specific item that month is going to be $208.80. So you want to do that for every product that you sell that month and add up the total variable cost and multiply it by how many times you sold this product. So here it's 9.36 times 16 sales. And so it costs you $149.76 to create those 16 products that you've sold over the month. Once you do that for every product that you sold that month, you will have a total cost of goods sold of, in this example, $358.56. So now we've done the cost of goods sold, we've looked at A, we've looked at B. Let's look at the third component here, C, which is your other variable business expenses. And dependently of what it costs you to actually create the product that you sold, which is what we just calculated with the cost of goods sold, each month you will have business expenses that will vary depending on how many items you sell, but that aren't directly related to the actual creation, the actual production of your products. These are things like shipping fees to send the products from you to your customers, merchant fees like Etsy fees, PayPal fees, Stripe fees, and advertising and sales commissions, because those commissions are based on how many products are actually being sold. So that's why it's a variable cost here and not something that's a part of the budget that you know exactly how much it will be every month, because if that was the case, remember, this would be a fixed cost. But here we're only talking about sales commission and advertising that you only pay when you do get a sales, so that it varies depending on how many items you sell. So by adding those up, you will get your total for other variable business expenses over a month. So here we've got shipping fees for $134, PayPal fees for $125, and sales commission for $200. So we have a total for other variable business expenses of $459. Now, once you've calculated your different variable cost elements for a given month, you've got your total cost of goods sold for that month, you've got your total for other variable business expenses for that month, you can add them up to calculate your total variable cost over that period. So in the examples that we've used, we've had a cost of goods sold of $358.56 and other variable business expenses up to $459, meaning that the total for cost variable for that month in the examples that we've used would be $817.56.